6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, what's up guys? This channel is dedicated to teaching people how to build, launch, and monetize their own apps. Now, just a quick overview about the course. The end goal is for you to have an app with users that pay money. This course will start completely from scratch and take you through the entire journey of publishing a production-ready app with monetization. Now, since every app is different, I designed this course to focus on the core building blocks that every app needs. So by the end of this course, you will have built a minimal social media Reddit style app. Now, the course is organized into 3 modules. Starting with the build module, we're going to code the app using Flutter. We'll focus on mobile apps, and then later down the line, if your app is successful, then you can decide if you want to expand to different platforms. Now, starting with one of the most fundamental concepts in app development, which is authentication. I'll show you how to implement not only the email, but also Apple and Google sign-in, which is a must-have in a modern application. And once the user logs in, they can post a message, as well as comment, and they can navigate around using this nice tab bar widget. Then naturally, we will have a user profile and settings page to handle blocking, reporting, and all the features required to be approved on the App Store. When it comes to storing the data, we will use Firebase, and I want to mention here that the code is organized in a clean architecture type of way, such that any database of your choice should be easy to swap out here. Speaking of which, for the state management, we will use BLoC and qubits, which I absolutely love. And then of course, our app has to look aesthetically good. So I'll show you how you can steal my minimal design in both light mode and dark mode. So by the end of the first module, you will have built a fully functional app. Then we can move on to the launch section. So I'll show you how to prepare your app for submission to the Apple App Store, such as preparing the icon, screenshots, preparing the builds, and also how to deal with real-world situations like app rejections and how to overcome that. Now, to be approved on the App Store, we also need things like terms of service and a privacy policy page, which brings us to our landing page, like the one you're looking at right now. So I'll show you how to build a simple landing page using basic HTML and CSS, and I'll also show you how to host it for free using GitHub. These are all super valuable skills that I've gathered over the years. And then finally, the monetization section. So I'll show you how to price it to be either free download or a one-time payment. But more importantly, I'll teach you how to generate recurring revenue with subscriptions using RevenueCat. So we can create a kind of pro version of your app that users can pay for in like a monthly or yearly subscription. So that's what this course is about. It starts completely from scratch and takes you on the entire journey to build, launch, and monetize your own apps. Now, just before we start, I made this nice overview diagram of the different pages in the app and how they are all interconnected, which I think is always helpful to visualize. So at the very beginning, we will check if the user is logged in. If they are not logged in, then we will go to the login page or register page to create a new account. And once they are authenticated, we will go to the home page where users can post and comment. Then we have a nice little menu drawer for the settings page and the user profile page. And we can also log out from here, which will take us to the very beginning. So this is what we're about to code up. I want you to open up a brand new Flutter project and let's begin with the authentication. I've opened up a brand new Flutter project and you should just get this demo counter app. We're going to create this from scratch. So let's delete everything below the main function. And in my material app, I just want to check this debug banner to be false. And let's just start with a blank scaffold. So you should have a white blank app like this. Now let's come to our Firebase console and I'm going to create a new project. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it Build, Launch, Monetize App. And then let's create the project. Sweet, now that's done. Now let's start with the authentication. I want you to enable the email auth. Let's come back to our Flutter project. And the first thing I want you to do is open up Xcode. And let's open up the Flutter project. So that you can go to the runner. And I just want you to change the minimum deployment to 13 because that's what Firebase requires. And the other important thing is this bundle ID. So you can see it's got the example. Now I want you to select an appropriate bundle ID for you. So this will be important for when we publish this app to the App Store. So it's a good idea to set this at the very beginning. I'm going to say app.mitchcoco.blm for build, launch, monetize. So just select the appropriate bundle ID for you. And once that's done, let's close Xcode. And you can actually do something similar for Android in the build Gradle. So this will be useful for when we publish it to the App Store. Now let's open up our terminal. If you've never used Firebase before, then you're going to need to install the Firebase tools by typing in this command. But I've already done that, so make sure to do that. And what that will allow is for us to say Firebase login. So make sure you're logged in with your email. And then we can say Flutter pub global activate the Flutter Fire CLI. Cool, which allows us to now say Flutter Fire configure. And so you should be able to see your Firebase project. There it is. Now I'm going to choose the platforms. Let's just select iOS and Android. Cool. And once you've done that, you should be able to see in your folder structure the new file for this Firebase options. Currently, it's got a red squiggle because we need to import the Firebase core package. So in the terminal, let's say flutter pub add Firebase core. And so now there's no more red errors. And in the main function, just to do a bit of Firebase setup, let's say widgets flutter binding ensure initialized, and then we can await the Firebase and initialize the app for our current platform. Beautiful. Now at this point, I want you to kill the app and just rebuild it so that we know if we have successfully connected to Firebase. Cool, so if you come back to your Firebase project and you refresh the page, hopefully you can see that we have added the two apps to our Firebase console. Sweet. So now that our app is connected to Firebase, let's now focus on the authentication. So in the terminal, I want you to add flutter pub add Firebase auth. And while we're here, let's also add flutter BLoC, which is the state management that we're going to use to keep our code nice and clean and organized. So if you don't know what we just did, if you go to your pubspec.yaml, you can see the packages down here that we've added. So now we can start coding this up. Now I'm going to use a clean architecture and make the code as organized and modular as possible. So in my library, let's create a new folder called features. And the first feature we're going to implement is the auth. And so in each feature, I want to have 3 layers: the data, domain, and the presentation layer. So starting with the domain layer, this is the core part of your app. And so we're going to create an entity, which some people like to call models. And basically, we're going to have an app user. Okay, so everyone that uses our app is going to have a user ID and an email. And we can create the constructor for this. And then it's common to have a couple methods down here just to convert our app user into a JSON format and vice versa. So if you don't know what a JSON format is, it's a map, like this. Which is how the data is stored in Firebase. And then when we grab information from Firebase, we can convert it back into our app user object. Cool, so we've got our app user. Now I want you to create a new folder called repos, and we're going to create an auth repo. So this auth repository, I'm just going to comment here, we're outlining the possible auth operations for this app. So these are my main auth functions that I want to implement. The login with email and password, register with email password, have a method to log out, have a method to get the current user, and some other additional things like sending the password reset email. And we also need to have a method to delete the account, which Apple requires in the App Store. So now that we've got this auth repository, if you go to the data layer, we can create a new file called Firebase auth repo. And so in this data layer, I'm choosing Firebase to be the backend to implement this, but you can swap out any backend to use here. And so this is why coding in this clean architecture way is really useful if we want to change our backend to something else. So the cool thing about this is if you say implements the auth repo, we're going to implement each of these methods. So currently you can see it's got that red squiggle. And so if you hover over it, it's saying that we're missing the implementation of the delete account, get current user, and all of those methods. So if you just start typing login, you can see it's going to auto-fill out the fact that we need to code up this method. So we got login, we got register, and actually if you hover over this red squiggle, you can actually see we can create the 4 missing overrides. So these are all the methods in our auth repository that we need to implement. Cool, so let's start doing the Firebase part of this. And so for the login method, we're going to just try to log in with the email and password. Cool, so let's try to sign in. And then we can grab that information to create our user. And just return it. Cool, and if we have any errors, we will just throw an exception. Sweet, and that's how we do the login. Let's do the similar thing for register. So if you go to your Firebase auth, we can create user with email and password. And once we've done that, we can create the app user in our app and just return it. And catch any errors. Sweet, so that's register done. Now let's fill out the delete account. So firstly, we're going to try to get the current user and just make sure that there is a user that is logged in. And then we can try to delete the account. Cool, and just log out if we need to as well. Sweet. And then implementing the get current user. So let's try to get the current user from Firebase and just check if there is a logged in user or not. And if there is a logged in user, then return that as an app user object. Sweet. And then we have the logout, which is pretty simple as well. Just go to your Firebase auth and we can just sign out. And this one is also important. We need to send a password reset if they forgot the password. Sweet, done. So we've coded up all the Firebase auth backend stuff. So now that we've done that, let's close everything. We've done the data layer, domain layer, and now it's time for the presentation layer. So I want you to create a couple of folders here. So we've got the qubits, and we're going to create an auth qubit and an auth state. So starting with the auth state, what this is we're going to outline the different type of states we can have when a user is trying to authenticate. So for example, we can have an initial state. We can have an auth loading state. And then we can have an authenticated state, which, by the way, if they are authenticated, then that means we're going to have some sort of user that's logged in, right? And we can have another state for when they are unauthenticated, and also just an error state. And we can hold what the message is for the error. Sweet, so these are the different states that we can have. And so if you come to our auth qubit, this qubit is responsible for state management, which essentially is just trying to show the appropriate data on the screen. So let's try this. We can say auth qubit extends the qubit, and you can see the Flutter BLoC package, which we can hit enter to auto import. And for the type, we can say auth state. Cool, so whenever we call this auth qubit, we're going to need an auth repository to access. And let's also store the current user locally. And we'll create the constructors for this. And let's create a getter method to get the current user. And let's start filling out some of these methods. So I want to have a method to check if the user is authenticated. And so when I call this method, we can start loading. And you can see I'm going to emit this auth loading state. So we're telling the code and the app right now that we are loading. And so while that's loading, let's get the current user from our auth repo. And let's just do a quick check. If there is a user, then let's give it to our current user, and then we can emit the authenticated state and pass the user through. Right? Otherwise, we are unauthenticated. Sweet. So that's how we can check if a user is authenticated. Now let's fill out our login method. So again, we're just going to emit the loading state first, and let's go to our auth repo and try to log in. Cool, and if we have an error, just emit the auth error. And once we know what the error is, ultimately we're going to be unauthenticated in this case. Sweet, looking good. Now let's do the register. And register is going to be very similar to the login. So I'm just going to copy the main part of this method. But if you go to your auth repo, just change up the method to be register, and we can pass through the name as well. Sweet, and let's have our logout method. and then forgot password. And very last thing is a deleting account method. Sweet, so that's how we fill out the auth qubit. And again, this qubit is responsible for the state management, right? So you can see the auth repo that it calls, like it's calling these methods. And the actual logic for these methods are in the Firebase repository, right? So it's going to call all those methods, and in the qubit, it's just responsible for emitting the different states so that we can keep track of what's going on. Sweet. So now that we've done the qubits, finally we are up to the pages, which is the UI. So let's create our login page. And on this page, a user can log in with their email and password. And once the user successfully logs in, they will be directed to the home page. If the user doesn't have an account, then we can send them to the register page to create an account. Cool, so let's create a stateful widget for our login page. And in the scaffold, let's just give it an app bar. And so in our main.dart, you can see currently I'm just returning a blank scaffold. So now let's return the login page. Sweet, there it is. And so now we can just start decorating this UI. And just before we start building out the UI, it's probably a good idea to set up the themes. So I'm going to create a light mode and a dark mode. And so you can copy these colors that I've chosen if you like. So I'm going to go for a minimal sort of set of colors. The common ones to specify are the primary, the secondary, tertiary, and inverse primary, as well as the scaffold background color. So you can choose whatever colors you want, but you can see that I've just chosen different shades of light gray. And so once you've got this theme, if you come back to the main.dart file, you can specify the theme to be light mode. And there it is, you can see the colors are changing. So just to show you, for example, the scaffold background color, if I change it to red, you can see that it changes up. So any of the colors you can change in this light mode file. I also like to have a dark mode, so let's fill that out while we're here. So same thing, but for darker colors. In our main.dart file, currently we're giving the theme to be light mode, and there's actually a dark theme which we can give the dark mode to. And if you come to your settings, if you just search dark mode, you can change the theme, right? So depending on your phone's system theme, like your iPhone's dark mode or light mode, it will just change up automatically. Cool, sweet. So as we go along, we can fine tune these colors, but I think for now it's looking pretty good. So in our login page, let's start building out the UI. And I'm just going to put a bunch of comments just to make it as clear as possible. So we got the scaffold, the app bar, and the body. And in the body, we're going to have a big column for the logo. Let's have the name of the app, the email and password text field, forgot password, login button, and some extra stuff down the bottom. So this is the plan. Let's start filling this out. So for the logo, obviously you can bring your own image in, but we can sort that out later. For now, I'm just going to put in some kind of icon. And you can see we can obviously give it a color. But instead of giving a fixed color, I'm going to go to my theme and give it my primary color. So that's how we can access all of those colors we specified earlier. We have the name of the app. I'm just going to call it build, launch, monetize. Sweet, and let's keep going down, and now we're up to the text field. So if you just save this, you can see that we can type something into this text field. Now we're probably going to require a lot of these text fields in the future. As you can see, we need email text field and password text field. So it's a good idea to create this as a separate component just to make our code nice and organized, and we can reuse this. So if you come back to the login page, you can start typing my text field, and you can see there it is. And now we can just start decorating it in this my text field file. So what we need is we need a controller to access what the user typed. Let's have a hint text and an obscure text, which I'll explain a little bit later on as we go. But let's require these in the constructor. And we can pass the controller through and then pass the obscure text through. And we can try to decorate this. So I like to have some borders when it's unselected as well as selected. And so they're just going to have slightly different colors, that's all. And just to see what this looks like, let's come back to the login page. You can see it's got a red squiggle, so I'm going to just fill out all of these things. And the first thing is I need to actually have a text controller at the top. So let's create these, one for email and one for password. And so if you pass the email controller to the text field, it'll help us access what's in the text field that the user typed. We got the hint text, and the obscure text, I'm going to say false. And so you can see there is our text field with the border. And let's actually pass through the hint text as well, which is just kind of the default what is in there to let the user know what they should type. Sweet, looking pretty good. And we can also add a fill color. And it's looking pretty good. It's all stuck to the side though. So let's add an overall padding. And it's looking good. So now let's create the same text field for the password. And for the obscure text, you can see if I say true, it's just for hiding the text, right? Which is what we want for the password. Sweet. Cool. Now I think the border radius is a bit sharp, so you can curve it a bit. And let's get rid of this app bar now. And let's continue. So we're going to have a forgot password. Which I want to put on the sort of end. And one way to do that is just put it in a row, which will then align it to the beginning. And I'm just going to push the access alignment to the end. Sweet. And now time for the login button. And same thing as we did for the text field, I'm going to create this in a new component so that we can reuse the button. Cool, so there's our button. And we can start decorating it in this file. So we got the color of the button. Let's add some padding. And curve the corners. and just overall just decorate this up. And the main thing is we want to wrap this in a gesture detector so that we can actually tap on this button, right? So if you hover over the on tap, you can see what it requires. So I'm just going to copy that, and you can see at the top I'm going to require that, the on tap function. And let's also require some text. Sweet, so coming back to the login page, we can fill out the My button. On tap, let's currently just execute nothing. And text, I'm going to say login. Sweet, that's looking pretty good. Cool, now the OAuth signing, like Google and Apple, we're going to do that just a little bit later. Let's just finish off the very bottom. I want to have a section to say, don't have an account. Then register now. Sweet, that's looking pretty good. Now let's check out the dark mode. And I feel like we could switch up the dark mode colors. The tertiary, as well as secondary, I feel like we could change up the color. And I think that looks much better. Now I'm going to create a register page. So let's create a stateful widget. And it's going to be very similar to the login page. So I'm just going to copy this main body part and paste it in the register page and import everything that's needed. And in the main function, let's just return the register page so that we can see what we're changing. And mainly we just need another password for confirming the password. Which means we're going to need to create these controllers. And we're not going to need the forgot password. Also, let's just say, let's create an account for you. And it'll be a register button. Or we can say sign up. Cool, and then at the bottom we can say already have an account, then let's log in now. Nice. Also, if you like, you can add any additional text fields that you want. So let's say I want to add a username, then you can add that as well. So completely up to you what you want to include, but I'm going to do these 4 things. And our login page and register page is looking pretty good. Now in our main function, we're returning either a login page or a register page. So I need to know which one I'm going to display. So to handle that, I'm going to create a new file called auth page. And this page determines whether to show the login or register page. So initially, let's show the login page. And let's have a method to toggle between the pages. Sweet, and then when we build this, we can display the appropriate page. Cool, now to trigger this method, if you look in our login page, I'm going to need to accept a method at the top called toggle pages. And so if you come down here, the register now text, I want to wrap this in a gesture detector so that we can tap on it. Right, same thing with the register page. I'm going to wrap it in a gesture detector so that I can tap it, and then at the top we can pass through the toggle pages function. Cool, which means if you come to our auth page, it's got the red squiggles because we need to pass through that method. So this is where we can pass that in. And finally, in our main.dart, instead of displaying a login or a register, we can just show the auth page to handle that. So now you can click on these buttons at the bottom. So register, you can go to the register page and back to the login page. Really good. So now that we've set up the presentation layer, now let's actually put all this together and make our authentication actually work. So in my app, I want you to create the auth repo. So we created our Firebase auth repo at the beginning. And in our material app, I want you to grab that and we're going to wrap it in a multi-BLoC provider. So again, this is the BLoC state management that we're using. And so what this does is we are providing the qubits to the app. Right, the first qubit that we've created is the auth qubit. And at the end of this, you can actually also call the check auth method so that we can check if the user's logged in or not at the very beginning. Now it looks like we have some error in the test. Oh, let's get rid of this const tag. It's not that important. And finally, so you see this in the auth qubit, the check auth will be called at the very beginning. And this will call the auth repository to see if we are authenticated. Awesome. So in the material app, in our home, what I want to do is I want to return a BLoC consumer. So a BLoC consumer has a builder and a listener. So I'll show you what is happening. So let me just write these comments to be clear. So the first thing in the builder is we can check the state. And if our state is unauthenticated, then we're going to return the auth page. Now, if the state is authenticated, then let's return the home page, which we haven't created yet. So let's actually do that now. So you can see in the features, we have our auth feature. Now let's create another feature called home. And let's just quickly create the presentation folder, pages folder to finally create the home page. So I'm just going to create a very basic scaffold with an app bar. And let's come back to the main to import it. Cool. And then at the very end, let's say else it's just loading. So I'll just show a loading circle. Sweet. So that's the builder. Now the listener is also helpful because it will listen for specific state changes and we can actually run a method. So for example, if the state is an error, then I'm going to show a message. Sweet. And so just to be clear for you guys, you can see the state, right? If you just print the state, you should be able to see in the debug console what state we're in currently. So obviously at the beginning, we're going to be loading and it looks like we're unauthenticated. So we are not logged in, which is why we're seeing this auth page. And that's what we did in our auth qubit. As you can see, all of those emitting the states. So hopefully you're following on. So now that everything is set up, we need to just fill out for the user their details and then they're going to click this sign up button. So it looks like currently we're executing nothing. So what I'm going to do is, let's say register button pressed. And so at the beginning, let's just prepare all the info. Let's grab our auth qubit. And just a couple checks. First thing is I just want to ensure that the fields aren't empty. And if it passes that first case, then let's also make sure that the passwords match, right? And then we can register in our auth qubit. If the passwords don't match, then let's just show a snack bar. Cool, and if it doesn't pass the first condition, where some of the fields are empty, then let's also display a snack bar to display that error. Cool, and it's a good practice to dispose of all of our controllers to control for memory leaks. And that's it. So in our register button, we can now pass our register method. And you can see if I click sign up, you can see the snack bar showing the error at the bottom. Right, so let's actually make everything work, and I'm going to sign up. Sweet, and you can see we're signing in, and then we are directed to the home page. And you saw for a brief second the loading circle as well. And everything is looking so good. Now the natural next thing to do is to have a button to log out. So in our home page, if you look at the actions in the app bar, I want you to create an icon button to log out. There it is. Now if I click on this, I want to just go to my auth qubit and just log out. And boom, it just logs out automatically. So let's just test this out again. I'm going to create a new user. And you can see this is why BLoC is so helpful with the state management, because we can see exactly what's happening inside the app, like whether we're authenticated or not, for example. Sweet, that's looking really good. So now that we can create a user, let's come to our login page and do something similar for logging in when the button's pressed. We're just going to prepare the info. Ensure that the fields are filled and all the good stuff. Sweet, we did the method. Now let's pass it to our button. And let's test this out. So I'm going to try to log in, and it looks like we have some sort of error saying the snack bar was called, but we don't have a scaffold. And I think I know what happened. If you come to our main.dat file in here, for the loading, yeah, we're just returning the widget of the circular progress indicator, but we should put that in a scaffold as well so that we can use the snack bar and stuff like that. So come to your components and create a loading.dart file and just put it inside of a scaffold. So now you can come back here and just say loading screen. So that should work now. Let's try again. Sweet, so the loading is working good. Beautiful. Cool, now the natural next thing to do is to fill out the forgot password when they press on that. So let's open a box to ask the user. And we'll just ask for their email. And let's create a couple buttons. So cancel button. And then the reset password button. If you reset the password, then we're just going to go to our auth qubit, call the method. And it looks like we don't have an auth qubit. I thought we created one earlier. Oh, we did, but it's in the login method. So just pull that out. There we go. Cool, so if the message is password email sent, check your inbox, then everything's all good. So let's just pop the box and clear the controller. Let's test this out. So you can see in our auth qubit, we're calling this method. In our auth repository, which if we go to that Firebase auth repository, yep, this is what is actually happening. So looks like that's the message that we chose. So just make sure that it's the same message that we're checking. Password, reset, email. It has to look exactly the same as this. Cool, so now if you scroll down to the forgot password, go to the text widget and wrap it in a gesture detector. And pass that method in. Cool, so if I click forgot password, you can see this little pop-up box. We can enter an email, and then if you set reset, then you can see password, reset, email sent, and check your inbox. And so, yep, you should be able to get an email from Firebase to reset the password. Beautiful. Now if you come back to Firebase, we have done the email authentication. Let's now do the OAuth sign in. So the Google and the Apple. By the way, if you want to upload your app to the iOS App Store, it's a requirement that if you're going to use Google sign in, that you have to include Apple sign in. So let's start with the Apple. I want you to go to your Apple developer and create a new ID. So the bundle ID, so remember this is how we're going to identify your app that we specified at the very start. So for me, it was app.mitchcoco.blm, and you can put in any random description. And the capabilities, I want you to scroll down and just select the sign in with Apple, and then we can click continue and register. Once you've done that, I want you to open Xcode. Go to sign in capabilities and add in a new capability, which is the sign in with Apple. Cool. Now, if we come back to our auth repository, we had all of these methods from before. Let's add in a couple more for signing in with Google and signing in with Apple. Which means in our Firebase auth repository, you can see it's got the red squiggles because we have to implement these methods. So let's do that at the bottom. Starting with Apple, you can copy this code for the most part. So we're going to start by requesting the Apple ID credentials. And actually we need to import the packages. So open up your terminal, flutter pub add, sign in with Apple, And let's also do Google sign in. So those are the two packages we need. So once you've got that, we should be able to say await sign in with Apple. There it is. And get the Apple ID credentials. In the scopes, let's grab the email and the full name. Then we can create our OAuth credential. And just pass through the tokens. And then we can sign in with these credentials. And if that's successful, then we should be able to return this Firebase user. And if everything is all good, then we should be able to create our app user in our code. And just display any errors. Sweet, and that's pretty much the code that you need for signing in with Apple. Let's do something similar for Google. So we're going to begin with the interactive sign-in process. So go to your Google sign-in package and try to sign in. Similar things here. If the user canceled the sign-in, let's just return. And try to obtain the auth details from the request. Then we can create our credential and then sign in with these credentials. So to be honest, you don't need to spend too much time trying to understand this bit of code because it's just, you can just copy what I've written. Beautiful. So we've done the code for signing in with Apple and Google. So we've done the data layer, we've done the domain layer. Now it's time for the presentation layer. So go to your auth qubit and we need to now fill out these couple of methods for the state management. So for this qubit, it's very similar to when we log in, right? So I'm just going to copy that method. And all we need to change is just when we're calling the auth repo, just call the appropriate method. So sign in with Apple and everything else should be the same. And for the Google as well, just go to the auth repo and say sign in with Google. And all of the other state management stuff should be the same. Beautiful. Now it's just time for the presentation UI, so the pages. And I'm going to bring in a couple of icons. So the Apple icon and the Google icon. You can download these off the internet, but I've also got them in my code that you can download as well. So I have these two PNG files and I'm going to go to my library and create a new folder called assets. And let's drag these two images in. Cool, once you've done that, come back to the code and in the pubspec.yaml, we have to let it know that we're bringing in these assets. So you can comment the asset part out and specify where the folder is. So we put it in library/assets. And so you can see there's our little images. And in our components, let's just create these two buttons, starting with the Apple sign-in. And essentially, we're just going to try to display that image. So let's come to our login page at the very bottom. Let's put it in a row and see what this button looks like. my Apple sign in button. There it is. And if I save it, you can see there it is, and it's so big. So let's control the height. And that's looking pretty good. So now we can just decorate it up. I'm going to put some decoration for the borders and stuff like that. Let's make the border curved. And so you can style it how you want, but I'm going to go for like a nice minimal style. And I think that looks pretty good so far. So that's looking pretty good. Now finally, I want to wrap this in a gesture detector so that we can tap on it. Right, so let's require that at the top. And so coming back to our login page, it's got the red squiggle because we need to fill out the on tap. Sweet. So that's looking pretty good. Now let's make our Google sign in button. So again, it's super similar. I'm just gonna copy most of this. But change it to Google. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Cool, there it is, but it looks like the color is dark. So I'm actually gonna get rid of the color for the Google one. Nice. And the reason why the Apple button, I'm gonna give it a color, the inverse primary, is because if we change the theme, I want the Apple icon to look white. And the Google one is colored, so I think that's fine. So that looks really good. So I'm just gonna space this to the middle and just space it out. Cool. To make this look even nicer at the top, I'm just gonna include a kind of divider. So you can see that's what a divider is. It's just the line. But I want to put two dividers side by side, and in the middle, let's put a text widget to say or sign in with. Okay, and I'm just going to change the axis alignment to the end and try to just make this a little fine-tuned to look a little better. One useful thing you can do is wrap everything in a safe area widget. It just helps avoid the parts of the screen, like the notch area and stuff like that. So that's kind of helpful. Now I think everything's good. So since we brought in a couple of new packages, it's always a good idea to just kill the app and rebuild it. And I'm trying to rebuild it, but it looks like we have a little error. It says CocoaPod spec repository is out of date. We need to do the pod repo update. So this error you see quite often when you're developing for iOS with Flutter. And it's a really simple fix, essentially just to explain what's going on. We included these new packages, right? Like the Apple sign-in and the Google sign-in. And so every time we add these new packages for iOS, it needs to update its pod file to use those packages. So I want you to go to the terminal and I want you to follow these commands that I type in to ensure that it's updated correctly. So the first thing is I want you to change the directory to the iOS folder and I want you to remove the pod file. So just say rm-rf podfile.loc and just type this command exactly. We're going to pod deintegrate. So we're basically deleting the pod. And then let's say pod install repo update. So this will just cleanly update your pod file. Then I want you to say flutter clean, flutter pub get, and then everything should be good. So I'm going to try to run the debug now, and it should be all good. Awesome. Now while that's building, in our Apple button, you can see on the on tab, we are actually executing nothing. So when we call this, we're just going to go to our auth qubit and then sign in with Apple, right? Same thing with the Google. Just go to your auth qubit and sign in with Google. So yay, our app has successfully built. Now, if I click on the Apple, you can see it says sign in with your Apple IDs. So that's working perfectly fine. So we're on the simulator, but if you test this on your actual device, it'll make you sign in. That's what we want to see. And let's try the Google. And it looks like it crashed. And that's because we did all the code, but we actually didn't do the Firebase part. So let's come back to Firebase. And in our sign-in method, so we got the email, Apple. Now let's add a new provider for Google. So you can change the name of this project and select your email. And just click done. Sweet. Now if you go to your project settings at the top, go to your iOS, and I want you to download the Google Service Info.plist. Okay, I'm gonna pop that on my desktop. And if you open it, we need some of these values, so keep that handy. Now everything that I'm doing, I'm following the documentation for this package, right? So we're using the Google sign-in package. So you can follow what I do, but just remember that the most up-to-date information is on this package and it's got all the appropriate instructions. So I would highly recommend you to actually read it yourself. But this Google sign-in package, if I was to show you how to do it for iOS, you can see the iOS integration there. So I'm going to follow these steps. So we've created a Firebase project and registered our application. We've done number 2, enabling the Google sign-in. We've also downloaded the Google Service Info.plist. And then what we need to do is these steps now. So we need to add the client ID in iOS runner info.plist. So let's copy this and go to iOS runner info.plist. And at the top, just paste it in. And you can see it literally says what we need to do. So we need to replace this client ID value. And let's paste it in. Let's come back to the instructions. Number 5, we can actually skip because we don't need to do the backend server. We've got Firebase. We just need to do number 6. So copy that. And same thing under this, just paste it in. And what we need to do is the reverse client ID. So let's grab that and paste it in. So that's all the setting up for iPhone. So let's try this again. I'm going to close this and rebuild it. So Apple works, and then Google, yay, now Google works as well. It wants us to sign in and it shows us this dialog box. Hey, everything's working perfectly. Cool. So now if we log in and we're in this home page, let's start to progress forward.